Welcome everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to turn my video off. Good luck to everyone. Break a leg, as they say. All the best.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Akshay. Very impressive background. I was impressed to see your background with IIT, Harvard, then giving up everything to go back. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Good to be associated with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Has Mr. Nixon joined us?
Not yet. No.
He said he's already on.
So he may be in the attendees. Promote him from the attendees.
There are a few people in the attendees, yeah. Jairam Kumar Draud. Make sure he has the right link.
Yeah, I think Mr. Joseph has joined us. I think only Mr. Rahul is left.
Yogesh to join also.
It's 9:30. I think we should start. Good morning, good evening, and good day to everybody. All those who have joined us from different parts of the world, a very hearty welcome. I am Pradeep Kapur. I am a graduate from IIT-Delhi, having done my BTech and MTech there. I joined the Indian Foreign Service and worked as ambassador in a few countries and as secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. My latest book, which is Beyond COVID-19, Leveraging Technology for Better Healthcare and Envisioning a Better Future for the World, is a bestseller on Amazon. I hope you get a chance to read it also. I lead the Smart Village Development Initiative for the Wheels Global Foundation. Welcome today to our webinar on collaborating for CSR funding. Last year, Wheels Global Foundation was one of the pioneering organizations to set up the webinar series, a thought leadership webinar series. And we organized 16 thought-provoking webinars with industry leaders, with the common theme that came out was that when it comes to philanthropic activities, collaboration is paramount. Collaboration between the NGOs, with the industry, with the government, with the local communities, and so forth. In 2021, our webinars are more focused on implementation, program management, outcomes, measurements, and so on. For those who may be joining us for the first time, a brief introduction to Wheels. This is an initiative of the alumni of the Indian Institutes of Technology. Our mission is to offer technology-enabled solutions to scale philanthropy. We focus on the many challenges facing the world: access to potable water. The W in the Wheels is for access to potable water. The H is for affordable healthcare. E is for education. E is for energy. L is for rural livelihoods. And S is for sustainability. Where solutions do not exist, we encourage research and development at the IITs and other institutions through sponsorship. We work collaboratively with partners like IEEE ISV, which is the Integrated Smart Village Initiative of the IEEE, the Institution of Electrical and Electronic Engineers globally, the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry, Mission Samriddhi, Sevak, Spoken Tutorials, Surgeon Foundation, and many others. We embarked on an integrated approach for smart village development, where we look at development in a holistic manner, and entrepreneurship is at the core of making these projects sustainable. This is somewhat different from the narrative and the discussion on the smart city development, because smart also is defined separately, differently for the villages as evolved by the Wheels Global Foundation, with S being marrying the strengths of the rural community and the interlocutors, M being for measurements, A being for applicable technology, R being for applicability, and T for using technology to leveraging technology for social impact. In 2020, I am particularly pleased that two governmental organizations, the Niti Aayog in India and the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, recognized Wheels Global Foundation as their partners for technology transfer issues for rural development. So process and compliance are very important to us, as it should be for any NGO. I must add here that we are a volunteer organization and depend on the generosity of our many donors who believe that scale can only be achieved by leveraging technology. You can also get additional information about Wheels at the website www.wheelsglobal.org. This webinar series is made possible by a generous grant from Smita and Ashok Siddhanti of Endina, which is an environmental, health, and safety consulting company based in Washington, D.C. A quick disclaimer: all the views expressed by the speakers in this webinar are their own and do not reflect nor are endorsed by Wheels Global Foundation and its partners, or its boards, or its members. Now, some housekeeping messages. All attendees are on mute throughout the webinar. However, you may ask questions to the speakers by entering it in the Q&A box. If you need any help, you can chat with one of us by raising your hand or typing your request in the chat box. You may also send us a question by email to info@wheelsglobal.org. A recording of this event will be available on our website and also on YouTube and Facebook. Questions from the audience will be curated and channeled to the speaker by myself, assisted by the team of volunteers from Wheels. In February, we had heard from experts on social impact funds. If you missed our past webinars, you can find them on YouTube under Wheels Global Foundation webinars. You can also find them on our Facebook page. Today's webinar will help us understand what is CSR funding, how do CSR funders select the interventions to fund, how do they measure impact and outcomes, how is this different from traditional grants, how can NGOs apply for and engage in such corporate activities. Now, CSR mandatory requirements for organizations in India has been in effect from 2014. We would also like this panel of very distinguished speakers today to also explain to the listeners as to how that has played out since 2014, since it's a 7-year period now, and what do they envision as the future of this very brilliant initiative. Because when this initiative was taken, I did talk a lot about the way this would impact the CSR and the rural development scenario in India in a very profound manner, with a lot of my friends in so many different countries who also were policymakers and decision makers, trying to inspire them to do something similar in their countries. So the panel today will be moderated by my dear friend Yogesh Andlay. He is on the board of many organizations. He is an advisor to many. He was one of the promoters of Nucleus Software, which was one of the pioneering firms in the world for IT in banking. He has been in IT, consultancy, education, mentoring, and advising in so many different capacities. He graduated from IIT-Delhi in '79, served as president of IIT-Delhi Alumni Association. He has been active participant in Pan-IIT alumni activities globally. And we are very proud that he's a director of the Wheels Global Foundation in India. Over to you, Yogesh. Thank you very much to everybody once again.
Thank you, Pradeep, for such a nice introduction to the topic and to today's webinar. Today we are going to discuss about how NGOs can collaborate with corporations to access CSR funds. How can they use it? This CSR fund mechanism, when it was coined, it suddenly unleashed a great amount of funding to NGOs, because all the major corporations are mandated now by law to keep aside 2% of their profits to be deployed in social developmental activities. And there are guidelines that about the kind of activities that can be supported through CSR funds. Today we have an array of speakers with very diverse background. We have Mr. Nixon Joseph, who is a banker, and he manages the foundation of one of the biggest bank in the country, State Bank of India. We have an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, who's benefited by taking the CSR funds, scaling it up. We have Mr. Rahul, Rishi, who brings in the legal perspectives, the CSR Act, the responsibility of corporations, the accountability of corporations towards these funds, and so many and so forth. And we have Ms. Sarbani Ghosh, who's associated with CII and has been very, very active in building, developing, acting as a bridge between the corporates and the NGOs, as well as developing the capacity through the association within the corporates on this corporate social responsibility fund and its management. So before I begin, I would like to introduce, before we begin our session, the first speaker I would like to introduce, Mr. Nixon Joseph. Mr. Nixon is President and Chief Operating Officer of State Bank of India Foundation. He is the face behind the success of the CSR initiatives. He's worked with State Bank of India for 35 years, a banker, former president of Toastmaster Club, founding member of Tokyo International Debating Society, receiving awarded Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Award for Professional Excellence. He is a marathon runner. He's run 45 full marathons. As a coordinator of SBI Youth for India, a flagship program of SBI, he has been mentoring hundreds of youths. Through his active involvement in spearheading operations, SBI Foundation has positively impacted millions of lives. I have my personal experience of this organization, SBI Foundation. I've noticed every year they take a large number of young fellows, send them to different parts of the country. Not only the fellows develop themselves, they get connected to the rural communities, the underprivileged communities. They are also able to make significant contribution to the developmental activities wherever they go to, whether they go to a remote place in Odisha or they go to Udaipur or whatever it be. I invite Mr. Nixon Joseph to share his observations, his learnings, and about how NGOs can make use of CSR funds, how organizations, what is a CSR fund, what's been his experience, his perspectives on CSR funding. Mr. Nixon Joseph, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yogesh Andlay, for that detailed introduction. And I'm very happy that Wheels Global Foundation has given this opportunity to speak on CSR and how NGOs or civil society organizations can benefit from the CSR regulations brought by the government of India, etc. Like SBI, I will just start with SBI Foundation activities, which will give a clear idea about how CSR has been going on after CSR became mandatory in India. The government made it mandatory that 2% of the profit should go for CSR activities. And therefore, in 2015, the SBI Foundation was started as the CSR arm of State Bank of India. The mission of the foundation was to bring a difference in the lives of the marginalized and the vulnerable. And also, it was thought that all the activities which the foundation takes should be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So whatever projects we are implementing are aligned in some way with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 4 flagship programs. One is the SBI Youth for India Fellowship Program, where we take 100 youths every year. And it is a platform provided for highly educated youths to connect with the rural aspirations. We get almost 12,000 applications from all over the world for this fellowship. That is for 100 fellowships, which shows the tremendous interest among the youth to give back to society, as well as the passion for becoming a change maker. They go to the villages and they resolve at least one of the pressing issues in the villages. They come out with a pilot project, implement it to make it successful and sustain it, and then they leave the fellowship. But here almost 70% of those who join the fellowship continue in the development sector. And that is something of a proud achievement for SBI, because all of them, like most of them, have left their highly settled career with famous corporates, etc., and they have come to the development sector. And then they are continuing in the development sector. Is something that we all can be proud of, because these highly educated youths are giving back to society. And there is another proud fact is that almost 70% of those who join as fellows are girls. Something very inspiring, because our girls are ready to go to remote areas of India, braving the challenges and all, with the passion of making change. So that is about SBI Youth for India Fellowship. So there also we have aligned it with most of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the fellows also work on projects which are aligned to Sustainable Development Goals achievement. And second, we are having the SBI Gram Seva project, which is the holistic development of villages. This we have implemented in 75 villages in India. And what we are aiming here is to involve the community from the beginning, so that this project is owned by the community. Like the smart village of the Wheels Global Foundation, what we are doing here is bring IT initiatives, digital initiatives, intervene in the health sector, education, environment, waste management, provision of drinking water, convergence with government schemes, etc., so that whatever resources are available in the villages are better utilized. And for this, we involve the community, the Gram Panchayat, and a partnering NGO from beginning onwards, so that the program is implemented by them. And at the end of the project, that is 3 years, the program is owned by the community. So sustainability is inbuilt in the program. We are going to implement it in more villages in India. And it is a matter of pride for us to tell that all these villages are in very remote locations where other foundations would not dare to go. Like we have our village development in remote areas of Nagaland, Mizoram, Meghalaya, Assam, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, now Karnataka, Telangana, etc. So we are going to areas where generally other foundations or NGOs don't venture. That is also something very something of great pride for us, because after the CSR Act has been implemented, one grievance has been that most of the funds are going to industrialized states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, etc. It's a matter of pride that the SBI Foundation is going to areas where others are not frequenting. We are giving a lot of focus to northeastern states because we are aware that a lot of development has to happen there. Our third program is SBI Center of Excellence for Persons with Disabilities, where we are trying to empower persons with disabilities, removing the barriers to employment and employability of persons with disability. Recently, we have tied up with Microsoft to train almost 500 youth with disabilities and prepare them for the BFSI sector. So after the training, we also see that these youths are placed with some organizations. And as a response to COVID, we have come out with a flagship program on health, where we are providing short-term relief as well as projects which will address efforts to fight COVID. So there also we have tied up with Indian Institute of Science to support research and development in fight against COVID. So these are our flagship programs that apart from us, various NGOs approach us for funds to support them. So here what we do is, we first see whether the vision of the NGO and the SBI Foundation aligns. We do a proper due diligence where we see how the NGO is being governed, whether they are compliant with the regulations, whether they are having the necessary certificates like 12A and ATG in place, whether the board is very efficient, whether the board meetings are held in time, whether they have definite policies to address their issues, how the programs are monitored by them, whether the history or track record of the NGO is very good, whether there is any adverse observation about the NGO, and also whether they are capable of implementing the program with which they are coming, whether they have sufficient experience in implementing the program. So we look into all these things and then approach and then partner with the NGOs. Here I will tell you that SBI Foundation does not discriminate with between a bigger NGO and a smaller NGO. We have partnered with the various NGOs which are big. We have partnered with NGOs which are small also. What we look for is whether the activity which is proposed to be done will benefit a good number of people, whether it will help the marginalized, and whether it will be in alignment with the sustainable development goals, and whether the NGO is capable of implementing it. So this is how we onboard an NGO. Because there should not be any misunderstanding whether SBI Foundation will support a small NGO, a localized NGO, etc. Here I should tell that our Gram Seva programs, in all our Gram Seva programs, we have partnered with the localized NGOs only. I'll stop here and then come back later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for sharing about the SBI Foundation and your experiences. You know what I admire about SBI Foundation is that it's not only contributing to the development, it's contributing to the development of young minds. And many of these young minds, I notice after completing their fellowship, they continue in development sector, and many of them, they start their own NGO with all the experiences that they have got and the mentorship that they've got within SBI. So this is a wonderful initiative. I would now like to switch to Mr. Akshay Saxena. Mr. Joseph, we'll come back to some more questions after we have heard all the speakers, and then we'll continue to continue our conversation. So I now would like to invite Mr. Akshay Saxena, who is the founder of Avanti Fellows, a showcase of CSR fund usage. He is a graduate of IIT Bombay and an Ashoka Fellow. After a brief stint with the Boston Consulting Group, Akshay attended Harvard Business School, where he was inspired to support the children from low-income families in college. He wrote to a number of people in his IIT network, and with help from a couple of them, he started Avanti, which offers a mentorship network. Avanti won $25,000 through a Stanford business plan competition in 2010, which offered him the opportunity to take leave from Harvard and return to India to work full time on Avanti. Uh, Mr. Akshay, I invite you to share your views. What's been your experience in working with CSR? Do tell us a bit about your own organization, your own work, and how has CSR supported your initiative and helped to scale it up? Welcome, Akshay.
Thank you, Yogesh, and thank you for the opportunity to be in such august company. So I think maybe just quickly a little bit about Avanti. So we work. So we have kind of two areas of work. Our oldest area of work is helping low-income kids go to the IITs, to engineering school, to medical school. So for the first half of our journey from 2010 to 2015, we primarily focused on helping low-income kids clear the IIT JEE and the NEET. The difference being, and I think very similar to Wheel's mission, that our goal was always to use technology as a primary driver to achieve this. So our programs are actually all structured as peer learning programs, where the kids teach each other and do group study and self-study. And we supplement that with recorded video content, live classes, and applications, as well as workbooks. And I'm kind of happy to report that now over almost 10 years of work, we have the highest acceptance rate of any program in the country in the IIT JEE and the NEET. And this is at a scale of now thousands of children taking these tests every year. A key to this program succeeding has really been, one is governmental participation. So, from the very early days, I think we were very fortunate to become a pan-IIT initiative, get support from several IIT alumni, and thereby actually start, even when we were a really small organization with 30 children, who we were working with, we were able to partner with the Navodaya Vidyalaya Samiti, which is, a completely free residential rural school system, where, the best and the brightest from rural India get selected and then taught for free for 6 years with boarding and lodging paid for. And I think the second key really has been CSR participation, right? So I think, when we started in our early days, the first couple of years was, we were very bootstrapped, we had very limited funding. But the moment our first cohort actually graduated in 2012, 2013 is when CSR became actually a big part of our funding, even before the actual act came into force. So for instance, the Tata Group of companies have funded our programs now for more than 10 years, right? So we've had very, very consistent long-term funding, which is actually something I want to highlight, because I think often the impression of CSR funding is that it is short term, it is year to year, but I think we've actually been quite fortunate to have funders who've actually backed us now for close to a decade continuously. I think one of the advantages of partnering with these companies is that, I think over time it becomes a truer partnership, right? So I think we've also had access to more traditional grants, which are either high net worth individuals or foundations. But I think the kind of partnership you can build with a corporation, especially those who are engaged in engineering, and the fact that we produce engineering graduates, has actually been a very, very big factor in us being able to tweak the program, add elements to it like scholarships in college, add elements to it like field visits. So I think that's been actually quite catalytic in our growth. Even today, more than 60% of our funding is from CSR. And more than 80% of that funding is large value grants, not small value grants, right? So I think the reason I want to say this is I think, in many of my peers, this is a common impression that CSR funding is small checks that are erratic, but that's not at all been our experience. And that's not at all actually been the experience of most of my, many of my colleagues, who work in this space. Just to add to that, about 4 years ago, we started working outside of the Navodaya Vidyalaya system in state government schools, helping them build at-home learning or online learning programs, which are for free for the children. For instance, in COVID, we had almost 1 crore kids who were, on WhatsApp groups consuming content that we had built. And over there, I think, even though the initial technology and product creation was funded through more traditional grants, CSR has been fairly catalytic in helping us scale into certain geographies, certain territories, extend the same program into other states which are in the catchment of their operations. And the last thing I want to touch upon is, one of the reasons that I think it's worked out well for us. I think two things which, for those who are in the nonprofit sector, I think one is the participation of the government has been very, very key in us being able to attract CSR money, because it allows us to have a platform where scale and continuity is guaranteed. So I think that's been one reason why we've actually been relatively successful doing this, is from the very get-go. We've had a strong partnership with government, and not necessarily at a state level, but even at a local district, taluk level. I think that's been helpful in seeking grants. I think the second is the nature of our program is very, very outcome centric, right? So we're fortunate that our programming is very easily measurable. Every year the metric is very clear, right? What percent of the kids are qualifying the exam, what percentage are going to IIT, what percentage are becoming doctors. So the clarity of the impact assessment also has helped us, structure our grants to CSR, and also for CSRs to create advocacy and buy-in for our program internally, because it's a relatively simple program to measure. So I think those two things have actually been quite helpful in our journey. I'll take a pause here, and happy to talk more based on questions. Yogesh?
Yogesh, would you like to introduce the next speaker?
Yeah, yes, I am going to. So I'm sorry, I was on mute. I didn't realize it. Thank you for highlighting that, Pradeep. So, Akshay, I know Avanti fellows have engaged a lot of students all across the country. And these students have not only gone to the houses of these marginalized families, the students belong to different groups. They have helped them, mentored them, and I'm sure these other students who have grown up, who are going to become engineers and doctors and professionals, are going to take forward. They're going to be giving back to the society in a big way. So what you have done is a phenomenal. You have planted a seed. That's phenomenal. Now I would turn to Mr. Rahul Rishi. Rahul Rishi leads the social sector practice at Nishith Desai Associates. He's a graduate in law from Gujarat National University with Masters in Development Studies from TIS, Mumbai, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. He has extensively advised domestic, foreign, non-profits and cross-border philanthropies, advised program-related investments, foreign contribution laws, impact funding, and has worked closely on developing a $1 billion India Education Outcome Funds. He has authored many articles and papers and was an integral part of the committee set up by the Maharashtra Chief Minister's Office to reform Maharashtra's charity law, and has been actively involved in assisting several philanthropic bodies and institutions in reforming India-US philanthropy. He's an avid speaker on impact and philanthropy sector. So I invite you to share your perspective on CSR and help us understand how the regulations, the CSR acts, and various cross-border, the foreign contributions, how do they work, and how can NGOs make best use of these opportunities, these funding opportunities. Welcome, Rahul.
Thank you, Yogesh, for your charitable introduction. Hi, everyone. So the essence of this topic is to understand what regulatory and legal changes have been introduced in the CSR ecosystem, and how does it pan out on the ground. Now, I'll quickly take you through two specific changes that we have seen in the CSR rules, as well as under Section 135 of the Companies Act, which essentially is the CSR provision. And once I take you through two specific changes that I have captured in my slide, I would also go on to elaborate what those specific changes are all about in terms of its legal, operational, and on the ground specifications. May I request Will's team to put that slide here on the screen, please? Yes. Next slide, please. Yes. So one positive impact that this amendment has brought, the changes in CSR provision, is that the government has now allowed companies to provision for a situation where they could possibly design a CSR project which could run into multiple years, which is to say that it could run for at least 3 years now. And in a scenario where there has been a certain fund which is earmarked, the funds could be carried forward and it could run into 3 years for the purposes of you deploying those monies on the ground. So today a company would be in a position to deploy its CSR fund for carrying out CSR activities as part of its ongoing project. However, we also have to understand is that the law, when it had started initially in, since its inception in 2013, the law was more reliant on comply or explain principle. That position has subtly changed now. The broader guiding philosophy still rests upon comply or explain, but the fact that there has been so many affirmative amendments that have been introduced in the CSR provision as well as CSR rules, and there has been more and more reporting requirements that have been appended to these CSR provisions. For all practical purposes now, the law is as good as comply or face consequences. Now, the law also mandates a company which has not spent its CSR amount for a given year and has not been able to explain as to why it could not spend, and provided those unexplained reasons were not towards an ongoing project, those monies will now have to be transferred into a government designated fund, or it could be transferred into unspent CSR account, which the company would then have to spend within a certain time period, failing which those monies will then go to a government designated fund, which would be specified under Schedule 7 of the Companies Act. What that specific fund is going to be, the government has not really spoken much on that, but I do not really envisage a scenario where it could be a situation where the government would want those monies to be coming into its own centralized funds. But of course, there is a provision on that. In 2019, there was an amendment carried out which said that if there were any contraventions on CSR provisions, every officer in default could also face pecuniary as well as punitive actions. That provision has now been removed. So to that extent, it has been a positive change. And there are specific defaults that officers will have to be keeping in mind in case they contravene specific provisions of Section 135 in respect of making reporting under their annual filings. But again, and those specific changes are not very much intrinsic to what we essentially would want to discuss in the context of our current webinar. May I request to change to the other slide, please? Yes, so there has been a very important changes that CSR amendment rules have brought in. Now, if we go back to the earlier provision, it always said that, look, a company cannot possibly carry out CSR, which is in a way integral to company's own business propositions. That position has now slightly changed. Certain companies that are into research and development of vaccines, specifically focused on COVID, are now allowed to use their CSR funds to be engaging in research and development activities for 3 financial years, provided those R&D activities are in collaboration with incubation centers that are recognized as incubation centers by the Department of Science and Technologies, or are housed within public universities, or have been accredited by specific government departments. So in a way, the government is trying to imply that, look, if you are an organization that is into R&D as is into specific vaccine development, we may allow you to use CSR provided you tie up with us. So certainly there is a nudge on the public-private participation part in terms of government wanting to be more collaborative on this, which is a welcome step. I think as a next step forward, probably it may be good for the government to also expand that horizon and allow more such companies and more such R&Ds on different product and services to be also allowed to be used using CSR portfolio. But certainly that's a very positive outcome. Another aspect which we see as a positive one is that the laws now also allow companies to design, monitor, implement CSR projects, and those specific expenditures are now no more part of administrative expenses. Prior to the amendment in CSR rule, companies could only spend up to 5% in respect of engaging non-profit or for-profit service providers or vendors to make sure that there were project implementations that could be done or third-party vendors could be hired. But they had a certain restriction. They could not go beyond 5% of their entire corpus, or sorry, for 5% of the entire CSR bucket. That limitation has now been removed. And at the same time, even international organizations have now been allowed to be participating in this entire CSR ecosystem, where companies could possibly even engage them for project designing, monitoring, or evaluation sort of thing. Of course, they still are not allowed to be implementing it, because if international organizations are allowed to implement the projects, then in a way it would also create a fund crunch for a lot of non-profits that we have in India, which essentially act as implementing agencies. So other than the implementation part, international organizations can very much design the project, monitor it, evaluate it, and that also brings in a lot of positive changes in respect of making this ecosystem more competitive, making this ecosystem more efficient, and bringing in best practices from outside of India in respect of funding agencies, in respect of how they want to look at this sector, how they understand this sector in respect of impact that we get. So that's again one positive change, and expenses that companies incur on these specific set of activities would now remain outside of admin overhead. So again, the entire issue of 5% versus 95%, which we earlier used to face, would now no more be applicable in this case. Then there's also this concept of setting off of excess CSR amount. So for example, if I have a CSR budget of rupee 100 and I end up spending rupee 125, I am allowed to then set off the additional amount against what my CSR obligation for the next year could be. So that's another change that we have. Again, companies that trigger a certain financial threshold and have a certain CSR budget of more than 10 CR and specific CSR outlay of 1 crore for each project will now also have to undertake impact assessment. Now, this is a very, very positive change that we see has happened in this CSR ecosystem, because now it's a clear indication by the government that, look, as much as companies now want to be spending on CSR, the focus is now increasing more and more on understanding what impact are these companies creating. And when we understand this intent with the kind of new activities that companies are now allowed to be carrying using their CSR fund, which would not be restricted within the administrative overhead, what we understand is that the entire CSR ecosystem is gradually shifting from a pure check writing or check disbursement sort of an activity to a more evolved, collaborative, and impactful activity on the ground. And this is where we will now, in few years down the line from now, start to see a lot of more blended finance related projects being being used, or at least being tried out using CSR funds. And the fact that even today our CSR reporting requires us to essentially talk about the impact that we create, the vendors that we engage with, how much of money do we disperse them, what has been specific impact when we engage with these vendors on the ground. So obviously there will be a more scaled up understanding of this entire impact, and in the longer run, because the fact that CSR rules also allow companies to be collaborating with each other, we will have a situation where a few years down the line from now, smaller companies would together form a collaborative corpus, and then they would use this corpus to be deploying those monies on the ground. And because we will have a larger corpus, we would invariably also see a lot of different innovative financing models taking shape in one way or the other. Yes. Now, sorry, the previous slide, please. Yes. Another important change that we see here, which even the Income Tax Act had earlier allowed, but I think it was good on the MCA's part to further reclarify this. Acquisition of capital assets would now also be allowed, and any expenditure that is incurred in furtherance of capital assets would be considered as a valid CSR expenditure. So that's one change. But one specific issue which I still find MCA not really getting their head around is in respect of the blind spot that we have between FCRA and CSR. Now, while the FCRA, which is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, did amend this specific provision to say that, look, if any foreign company has a wholly owned subsidiary in India, those wholly owned subsidiaries would not be considered as foreign sources for the purposes of making contributions in India. However, what still remains unsolved is that we still have a lot of foreign banks that are operational in India by way of their branch presence. For example, we have Citibank, we have HSBC. And these branch offices also trigger their financial threshold, which mandates them to carry CSR obligations. Now, the fact that these are still branch offices, and when they make their CSR contribution to companies, invariably those monies end up getting deposited into FC designated account. Now, when we closely understand the concept of administrative expenses under CSR rules and administrative expenses under FCRA, we find that CSR rules are a lot more accommodative in respect of expenses that are supposed to be admin or not admin. FCRA to that extent is very restrictive. So we would have a unique situation where our board and our CSR committee would pass a policy allowing for certain projects to be carried out in a certain manner, factoring in expenses that CSR laws allow you to be factoring in. But the fact that because the money emanates from a foreign source and it goes into a FC designated account, you would then have to change your entire operational expenses and reconsider what could be your admin and not admin expenses. And at the same time, the fact that if CRA also does not allow you to be sub-granting those monies, so any possibility of you wanting to use that money to be engaging with non-profit service providers or vendors or in downstreaming those monies by way of sub-grant would also get stopped. So this again is a unique issue. I think MCA, I'm hopeful that MCA would look into this technical blind spot that we have and try clarifying this issue, because when we look at the data, we still find that a lot of times these banks that are operational by way of their branch offices end up having very stronger CSR portfolios. So it does not make sense for us to lock in those amount of money into FC designated account where we end up having lesser impact than what we could otherwise have if they were operational through their normal CSR account in that sense. Next slide, please. New opportunities that we have that we may see coming in years are certain specific models which in fact we have been in discussion with several funding agencies as well as CSR bodies here, and we have been working also on a transaction which is on social impact bond around skilling and employment with the government SPV, but there are ways through which a domestic CSR funder can play the role of an outcome funder, and foreign foundations could act as risk investors. And in a scenario where we have specific non-profit government SPVs, which are specifically focused on either learning outcomes or on skill development or on livelihood, they could actually upfront take the risk. Those risks could then be incentivized, which may be linked to social outcomes that those investments would help us achieve, and basis certain social metrics that the risk investors help us achieve, outcome payments could be made. And currently under CSR rules, outcome payment can certainly be made by non-profits so long those outcome payments flow from one non-profit account into another non-profit account. So in a scenario where we have government SPVs which are in the nature of non-profits, we actually see very positive possibilities of more and more collaborations taking place, at least on the lines of either development impact bonds or social impact bonds. One is currently in action in the way of negotiations happening between parties. So this is one which will definitely be launching anytime soon on the usage of CSR funds to be addressing issues around skill development and livelihood. But at the same time, pay for success is another model, which also not is very different from DIB or SIB, which is social impact bond, but the contractual obligations in that sense vary a bit more, but the genesis is more or less the same. At the same time, we also now will see a lot of new organizations coming up which would be specifically focused on monitoring and evaluation and impact assessment in relation to CSR projects. So we may actually have few startups which may want to be running as a specialized agencies catering to this specific requirement, because now the law also mandates us to be including these specific aspects as part of our annual reporting. And at the same time, international organizations now are also allowed to design, monitor, and evaluate CSR projects. So these also now would begin to create new business models around the entire CSR ecosystem that we have. Thank you.
That's so wonderful. You have shared the wide array of the regulations and all those the way government is mandated CSR, and you brought in all the various nuances and the finer points that impact CSR funding. Thank you very much, Rahul. Now I turn to Ms. Sarbani Chakravarty. My apologies to you, madam. I misspelled your name in the initial
no problems, not at all. It's completely fine.
So sorry. So, Sarbani ji is director at Confederation of Industries, CII, and leads the development initiative vertical. She is the convener of the India Business and Disability Network, which includes rural development, women empowerment, inclusion of persons with disabilities, and enabling impactful CSR program. Also engaged with CII Foundation, a development trust set up by CII on governance and compliance aspects and disaster relief and rehabilitation initiatives of the foundation. Prior to CII, Sarbani ji had undergone a 3-year professional fellowship program under Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. She's a postgraduate in rural management and an honors graduate from the Calcutta University. So we welcome you, Sarbani ji, and we would like to hear your experiences, your observations about CSR and the kind of work CII is doing in in promoting CSR amongst corporates and on its own account too. So welcome, Sarbani ji.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Wheels Foundation for taking up such an important topic and at an appropriate time, I must say. And it is a tall task when you be the last speaker with such a great lineup of speakers, and it was simply a learning for me. So congratulations to all the speakers who spoke before me. So coming to the legislation piece, I must admit that the CSR legislation, which we all agree was a watershed moment for the CSR ecosystem in general. So overnight, CSR was transformed from a from a small focus area into a practice, a big practice within the companies. Large businesses especially set up their CSR teams. They are now setting up, many of them have started setting up their own foundations. CSR basically has entered the boardrooms of companies. And therefore, what we are seeing is it is much more planned, more strategic, and there's a professional lens to it. The CSR rules, we can say, provided that enabling framework for companies, because many of them were not in the business of social development. So the rules became a guidance document for companies to plan and undertake CSR in a mission mode. There were initial teething issues, but I think the Ministry of Corporate Affairs have been a very cooperative partner actually in this process. They brought out several clarifications between 2014 and 2019. They brought out the FAQs from time to time, and they went to the extent of even notifying that the rules are to be interpreted liberally by the companies. So the activities, I must say, picked up over the years. what we have seen is from between 2014 to financial year 2019 and 20 that around 80,000 crores of CSR funds have been invested in the development sector. And while it has reached to almost all the states and union territories, but as Nixon had also kind of mentioned, it's the industrialized states of Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu, which has received the major share. Also amongst the thematic areas, it is education, skilling, and livelihoods, which have been the preferred sector that we've followed. We followed the CSR trends over the years. And this has been a uniform pattern that we are seeing. In addition to that, of course, the second sector is health, sanitation, and safe drinking water, which is followed by rural development. Over the years, what we also saw was that the government had kept a close watch on how the companies performed and how the ecosystem could be further strengthened. So between 2014 and 2020, there were 2 high-level committees which the government had set up. There were multiple consultations, and as CII, the role that we played here was big in terms of, as an industry association, we front-ended the views from the industry. We had regular dialogues with the ministry. So the new amendments, which Rahul he was very articulate and presented. I mean, it was really eye-opening. So when the new amendments got notified, it was an outcome of all these appraisals, assessments, and consultations that happened. So while the overall spirit of the CSR remains the same, 2 elements which are very, very evident from the industry perspective is accountability and impact. The responsibility of the board of directors has been broadened. We can see the CFO now needs to certify the utilization. The policy now includes guiding principles for selection, implementation, and monitoring of activities, as well as formulation of an annual action plan. And all these things now needs to be also projected on the website of the company. At the same time, organizations who want to engage in CSR as an implementation partner, they now need to ensure they have both the 80G and the 12A, which wasn't there before the amendments came in. And they're also required to register with the MCA portal, which is yet to come up. So while there are areas which needs further clarification from the government, the amendments have been developed with a lot of thought and are quite forward looking. So for example, allowing multiple year projects, focusing on impact, allowing engagement of international organizations are really forward looking. So now what companies will really be looking from NGOs, firstly, strict adherence to the compliance aspects with the CSR amendments, the FCRA coming in. So what we are seeing is that NGOs need to be now very, very conscious about their compliance aspect, their documentation. They should be registered in the portal. They have to have the 80G and the 12A. Also, in our dialogues with the industry, what we are seeing is that companies now, the plans that they are making for the next financial year, and especially those who are already the companies who have a strong experience of CSR, they are saying that now they've started looking for long-term plans. So earlier, while they would only look for 1-year project or smaller short-term projects, now they are saying that, you know, we want projects which have a span of 2 to 3 years. Also, in terms of identifying implementation partners, there are 5 key things which we have been able to, so far kind of perceive. First is reputation and credibility matters. So Pratham, or, there are NGOs like Pratham, Pradhan, Care, Oxfam. They have built their work over the years and they've been visible and they bring a lot of credibility of years to the table. So I also heard Akshay speaking, about the 10 years partnership that he has built with the Tata. So that's the whole point, that, your credibility and reputation is the primary kind of, aspect of your partnership. Secondly, many companies go through the route of consultants or umbrella organizations like GuideStar, Help Your NGO, Dasra, Samhita. So they take help of these organizations in identifying an on-ground partner for CSR. Referrals or word of mouth really works well. CSR is a very small world and everyone talks to everyone. So, it helps to be known as a good NGO. Also aligning yourself with organizations like government organizations like NABARD or any multilateral has been helpful. A few weeks back, we were having a conversation with a small NGO. We haven't even heard about them, but we have heard that they are very, very good at implementation. And we asked the company that how did you come across this NGO, because we couldn't even find them on websites or any of the social media pages, and they said that they were referred by NABARD. So these linkages help, and all these big companies they go through these processes. Also secondary research, so many of the companies, they said that they go to these online platforms like Samhita, CSR Marketplace. As CII, we have a online platform called BAC Samman, which we developed with the Bombay Stock Exchange, and this was something which we had developed around 5 years back. But it was pleasantly surprising that now many companies are saying that they go to this portal to look out for projects and NGOs. Finally, my advice or suggestion to NGOs would be that leverage social media. It has tremendous potential for visibility and to engage with stakeholders. Also, that given that it's been more than 5 years since the legislation has come into existence, most of the large companies to an extent have been able to figure out how they want to go about CSR, and it's the medium and the small scale companies which I feel need guidance and hand holding, and that is where the opportunity lies. The MCA, if you see in the amendments, have been re-emphasizing on the collaborative projects piece. So there is a huge scope for such small and medium scale companies to come together, collaborate, and create the kind of scale and impact. And NGOs, I heard the chair of today's panel, how Wheels Foundation has been, creating such collaboration. So we need more collaborative spaces, and NGOs, I think, can become these vehicles in bringing the industry, the government, the institutions together. As CII Foundation, which has been set up by CII as a trust, we are also implementing similar projects. For example, we've identified a common problem like the crop residue management. There was this big issue that it was contributing to air pollution all across North India, especially during the winters. So we were able to come out with a solution, and today we have 10 companies collaborating on this project across. And the partnership also brings in the state government, the district authorities, and the Punjab Agricultural University. And we started this 2 years back with only 10 villages and 2 companies, and now we are working across 200 villages in Punjab and Haryana. So my take here is that companies are open to new and innovative ideas. But given the current amendments, they will look for projects with solid quantifiable outcomes, and they are very, very obsessive about impact numbers. 2 key aspects which companies usually look for, I've seen, is sustainability of projects and also scale. So I'm hoping that this entire CSR version 2, which we will see now, will have many more collaborative projects which can provide that answer to scale and impact. So that's from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarbani ji, for bringing out all these the flavors and what kind of activities that you shared about like crop residue management and the 5 principles that NGOs could use. I used to be very fascinated by an ad from Tata Steel, where the full page would be blown up on the football team and the football training, and in small letters at the bottom it would be written, "We also make steel." So I'm curious to understand from you. We have had the CSR for 5 years, mandated and regulated and everything. What impact do you see on the social responsibility quotient of corporates as an outcome of this CSR activity. So what's your observation that how their social responsibility quotient has changed, has improved over a period of time now?
So the change has been immense. I mean, there's no doubt that the first reason being that it became a boardroom agenda. So this was something as CII we started advocating way back in 1990s, and we the idea was to make companies socially responsible, and now that it has become a boardroom agenda, we are hearing the promoters, the CEO, the CMD. So it's all top down. And once, the message comes from the top, this social responsibility will invariably, get integrated into the genes of the company. So that is something that, goes without saying that it has, the needle has moved a lot. However, when we talk about CSR, the definition is very different in India and the way we compare it globally. So there is also the responsibilities piece in terms of taking affirmative action, looking at diversity and inclusion. There is also the environment that needs to be seen. So there are also different specs, I think, and I'm hoping that, with the SDGs also coming into play in India now, and, somewhere the government is trying to push the SDGs into the CSR sphere, because when we were having conversations with the MCA, they had already done a kind of a mapping exercise to say that where, how CSR is impacting each of the SDGs. So somewhere we are feeling, we have a feeling that while in 2014 it was seen more like a small project kind of a piece, but we will see this movement where, beyond projects, these other aspects will also get covered. Also, there is the national voluntary guidelines, NVGs, on which the MCA is again working. So given that MCA is playing that central role of ensuring that companies are responsible, so I'm hoping that, everything gets integrated and the needle moves further ahead.
Thank you, Sarbani ji. I would like to invite Rahul, Rishi, and I have I'm curious, Rahul, if you could share, the CSR activities, CSR Act has become sort of mandatory, which is very good in a way, but a whole lot of legislation, the acts, the constraints, the guidelines, and that's being put on these CSR activities. Do you think the CSR process, in the process, these social activities are getting throttled? And how do you see its impact on NGOs and social sector circle, Rahul?
So, I mean, if I have understood the question correctly, the idea is to then understand what specific activities are considered as valid CSR activities. Have I understood the question correctly, sir?
Okay, that is one part. But with all these compliances being put in, that if you want CSR funds, you have to be ATG, 12A, you have to be registered on MCA portal. Then for corporates to say, you have to have things done like this, measured, whole lot of what you say, directives have been put. So has it throttled, or has it promoted or supported?
So there are two aspects in my response. One, from where the government started this concept way back in 2013, this government has expanded it for sure. They have made it more broader, yes. But at the same time, each successive government, they have this tendency to get back to the license Raj system, and I see those specific fingerprints of those, backdoor license Raj system also in this CSR ecosystem, which was not the case earlier, but it is now. For example, the government wanting to set up its own designated fund, wherein if you could not spend the money for certain reason, it goes into the government's account. That is not required. It's uncalled for. Why would you do that, right? You rather have companies pay fine. You wouldn't want companies to pay fine or something which in philosophy and in essence is voluntary in nature, right? I mean, to see someone paying a fine because of not doing charity also entirely goes against the very genesis of how rights are construed, either it's at an individual level or at an institutional level. So I think to that extent, the government really needs to be a bit more liberal. They have to let it go in that sense. And look, any ecosystem which is more liberal always becomes more self-sustaining. And the more we start bureaucratizing CSR norms, we end up increasing cost of doing business. Like, for example, because of recent amendments, a lot more NGOs, service providers, for-profit ones would also come up for monitoring evaluation work, impact assessment work. Now, if each and every non-profit or entity has to then register themselves on the portal, tell them, inform them about what 12A and ATG they have, it unnecessarily creates business hurdles for us. Now, for example, if I'm a startup guy, I want to be playing the role of an implementing agency. It technically or monitoring and evaluation work, it would not make sense for me to actually be in receipt of 12A and ATG, right? And there is no guarantee that I am going to receive 12A and ATG within a certain stipulated period. What if I do not receive those certifications 3 years from now? So then for 3 years, what would I be doing? Nothing, literally nothing, right? So these are business issues, practical issues that the regulators should also be mindful of, to make sure that, look, do not overkill the system by making it over-regulated. That's not the idea. If CSR as a concept is voluntary, the law should also be enabling. It should not be, acting in a reverse manner in that sense.
So thank you, Rahul. Thank you for sharing your observations, and I fully agree with you that bureaucratization will kill the spirit of the volunteership. So Akshay, I would like to turn to you now and understand from you. You have had very long, successful relationships with funding organizations such as Tata Trust. So could you please throw a little bit more light on how NGOs can build long enduring relationships with the funding organizations, the CSR companies, and what's your take to what all places these CSR monies can be applied? Can it be applied to developing technologies of different natures, say better delivery of vaccines, etc.? So Akshay?
Yeah. So I think just on the first question, Yogesh, I think that it's kind of slightly different with companies, which is the CSR being corporations and foundations, right? So for instance, the Tata Trust or the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, who are kind of institutional funders, I think for them often these are, there's a larger national strategy that you have to be a part of. So for instance, in the case of Tata Trust, the piece that we fit in was trying to get rural kids to have to transform their lives through careers, right? So I think it's really important to figure out where in the broader national strategy you fit, right? And it sometimes takes actually quite a long time or long courtship period to actually figure out how to get money, right? So many of these closing like institutional grants will often take somewhere between, I think I tell most other social entrepreneurs, somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, depending on how lucky you are and how well it fits. It could be anything. I think with CSR, I think even though it is moving to a much more long-term view, I think it's more clear what impact objectives most companies want to meet, right? So for instance, with many of the Tata Group companies, a part of their CSR money is set aside for college access, right? So they want low-income kids to go to college, right? Which is where we fit very cleanly. So it's very easy to know which organization to talk to and which organization not to talk to, right? So I think I wrote this in response to one of the questions, right? Which is, the worst thing to do is to randomly, blast every CSR professional, saying, please fund me, right? That's not good, not very useful. But I think if you look at the CSR giving patterns of most organizations, it's relatively clear what causes they've adopted, right? So, whether it is rural, like village transformation, or in some cases technology, or in some cases college access. So I think if you're focused about firstly talking to people who care about your specific problem, I think the second, especially for younger, smaller organizations, being clear about what you do and doing one thing typically helps. I think the other approach which doesn't help is to go to the funder and say, hey, what are you interested in? Let me find a way to do that for you. Right? Because it's kind of contrary to a lot of what was said by many of the other panelists, right? Like you want to stand for something and stand for credibility in one thing, ideally, even if it means you can't talk to 8 out of 10 funders. I think in terms of nurturing that relationship, I think it's really, really important to, I think, be honest. Like with many, it's not always, doesn't always go well. Right? In many years, you may not meet the metrics you signed up for. And to be collaborative, right? Which is to make sure that the partner feels like they're part of your project, not someone you talk to twice a year, once to get the money, the second time to give them a utilization certificate, right? I think as long as one does that, and I think the third, which I think Sarbani also said, right? I think one of the roles of the nonprofits is to make sure the work is highlighted, right? So every CSR giver that I know, in varying degrees care about, the fact that their employees, their other stakeholders are proud of the giving that they're doing. And that burden is essentially on the nonprofit, right? To make sure that the work is highlighted, that the partner is highlighted, that there's some connect with the employees of the partner. So I think it's really a matter of understanding what the partner wants, which is often some social goals and some organizational goals, and then being very honest and clear and about how you utilize those funds and building true partnership. So that I think is the answer to the first question. I think the second question, I think, and especially, I think COVID has started to shift this, right? And we've spoken about impact bonds and sustainability, right? I think it's really, really important that CSR money, now that both the regulation has become more sophisticated, to be like, even now, it's not very clear whether you can fund engineers, right? It's kind of in a vague bucket for CSR. But I think we're getting closer to the point where meaningful technology investments can be made through CSR money. And often on technology investments from tech givers, there's a multiplier effect, right? So you can fund the nonprofit to do some parts of the product development. You can actually subsidize some of the product development with your own staff, right? That is starting to happen. And I think that's a huge potential, right? Where someone like an Infosys who has the ability to build certain amounts of software can build some tools. And this has happened in the past. So for instance, with ADR, with several other organizations, Infosys and Wipro have built part of their technology solutions. But also give to the nonprofit to do things like user research, field testing, and build some basic product management capabilities in-house. I think that's going to be transformative. And I think it's also really critical.
Thank you, Akshay. Yes, I'm also conscious aware. I have seen several startups receiving funds from corporates during this COVID period to deliver some of the products that they developed, the diagnostics, the decontamination equipment that they were developing. They got some development grant from corporates, as well as got some money to deploy it as pilots. So turning to Mr. Joseph, because Mr. Joseph, you come, with, you have been head of the foundation and you have a good budget, great budget. Here's a very specific question, maybe a selfish question from our side, because Dr. Raj Shah, he runs a telemedicine operation on behalf of Wheels. And he requested me to ask specifically that how can Dr. Raj Shah reach out to the corporate social funding organizations and raise funds for an activity such as telemedicine operations. So what guidance would you like to give to Dr. Raj Shah on this? Mr. Joseph.
Yes. The one issue here is like when it is a startup, they may not be having a proper organizational setup or many of the requirements which a foundation will be demanding. So how we have supported such organizations, especially those who are in telecare or telemedicine, etc., is that like they have partnered with some NGO, and then they have approached us, and the NGO will be implementing this telecare, or maybe the organization itself, which is implementing the telecare, may be registered as a trust or an NGO, so that they can get grants directly from the foundation. In like our case, what we have done is like we have supported some NGOs who are giving spreading awareness or preparing healthcare workers to face deal with COVID related COVID-related problems on how to increase the capacity of healthcare workers. So in that case, what has happened is we have supported them because they have registered themselves as an trust and they are running the activity. But what will happen in the case of someone who is a individual is that they will have to partner with some other organization, maybe a Section 8 company or a trust or a society, so that we will be able to partner with that organization and route the funds. And this has happened in several cases. As you have already told, when this COVID has sprung up, we have many startups have come with very innovative programs. And how we supported is that these startups have partnered with some reputed NGOs and approached us. And then we have supported that NGO, and they have they're implementing this activity through that startup. So that would be the way to garner CSR funds.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Now I go back to Akshay, Ambassador Pradeep Kapur. If you have any questions from the audience that you would like to present, pose before the panel, I invite you to share those questions, ask those questions.
Thank you so much, Yogesh. My goodness, what a webinar. It is like a mega webinar. I'm just so happy to have been here today and to have listened to these very impressive lineup of speakers giving such phenomenally useful information to all the participants. My question is, I have lots of questions. There are lots of questions from the participants. Time is, however, a big constraint. So I am going to ask just one or two questions if possible, and then also move on to the takeaways, because even if we were to discuss just the takeaways, it will take away a lot of time of all the participants. So one question is, can CSR money be applied for developing technologies, for example, for better delivery of vaccines, better preservation of vaccines, and better logistics management of vaccines? Which speaker would like to respond to that? Rahul?
Sure, if I may, yes. So I'll just go back to the slide, which essentially captures the existing regulation around research and development, and then I'll answer the question that you have posed here, sir. So yes, currently CSR funds are partially allowed for carrying out core business activities, provided the company is engaged in R&D activity of new vaccine, drugs, and medical devices in their normal course of business. They may undertake R&D activity for new drugs, vaccine, and medical devices related activities for financial year 2021, 22, and 23. Now, if we go by the plain reading and do a more conservative interpretation of this provision, we understand that logistics or supply chain management and those related aspects would not be covered. But when we read this provision in line with circular 15/2014, I might be getting the digits wrong, but a circular which was issued by the MCA in 2014 in the month of April or May. So when we read this provision in conjunction with that circular, we would understand that the provision is to be interpreted liberally. Now, it's a no-brainer that if I develop a vaccine, I need to have a robust supply chain management to be supportive of that infrastructure. So to that extent, if I have a company where I have deployed certain funds to my foundation to strengthen my supply chain management in respect of delivery of my vaccines, which I'll be developing using my CSR funds, which are currently allowed under law, I think it should be a defendable case.
Okay, thank you very much. That is very, very useful. And I think all the inputs by all the speakers have been very, very informative and useful and great value. The other question which we have, which I will request both, Mr. Nixon Joseph and Sarbani to attempt to answer, is that, is the industry corporate sector in India today genuinely interested in rural development, or is this being thrust on a reluctant, partner or entity, in terms of the fact that, I had anticipated that the number of volunteers would come out from the corporate sector with sabbaticals and permissions and support from their organizations, that, okay, if I am the CEO or president of any organization, I will say, I want at least 10 people or 20 people from my organization to go out every month in turn for CSR activity on the field as sabbatical in the rural areas. Because why rural areas emphasis? Because if we see the population in the rural areas of India, it is maybe more than 700 million, and the needs are phenomenal. And there is a lot of attention given by international development banks and other entities to the urban areas. So is that happening happily, or is that happening reluctantly, or is that happening hardly? First, Mr. Nixon.
It's a very challenging, interesting question. But then see, what I find is that many of the organizations are doing it from a compliance angle. But then our CSR is evolving in India. We are making it almost like a strategic CSR, integrating CSR into the company's operational strategy, etc. And it is happening. And I would tell that from 2015, when this act was made CSR mandatory, to the present times, a lot of changes happened, and a lot of corporates are taking interest in bringing change. They have taken initiatives. And as far as the SBI is concerned, after starting the SBI Foundation, our focus has been on rural development. And that we have been doing very genuinely, because we have selected remote villages for developing it, this village infrastructure or standard of life, etc. If it was not genuine, we could have selected some villages near the city. But we have selected villages so far so that this will come to areas which are where interventions are not there from other foundations. And ultimately, it all depends on the passion of the people who are implementing it. This cannot be made by rule or by law, by government regulation. We cannot tell that change can happen, change should happen, because it can happen only if the people involved are passionate. Otherwise, it will all be like a compliance idea only. Yes, we are doing something, it is giving very good pictures, PowerPoint presentation, it is good for the annual report, etc. So it ultimately depends on, we are having something to do, whether we are doing it with our mind, with our heart. That is the thing. And second thing is, we are SBI is bringing a employee volunteering policy that started, where we are trying to allow our employees to volunteer for activities involving our own CSR projects or some other activities which will bring some positive change. So I am of the view that various organizations, corporates are doing something which is very, very genuine. But then, as I told already, all these finally depend on how passionate you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Nixon. I will now request Sarbani for a very brief comment.
Sure. So it's a very, very actually interesting question, I must admit, and very paradoxical, I must say, because I just remembered that a couple of years back, maybe more than that, actually, 4-5 years back, the Ministry of Rural Development, this then secretary, he had a meeting with the Indian industry. I was also there present in that meeting, and there was a request, and it was very genuine, that the point that you also made, sir, that the industry holds a lot of strength in terms of their management capability, their skills, and it would really do well if that can merge and converge with the rural development program that the government is running. The issue, one of the question which was then put across to the secretary was that we will be more than happy to send out our employees on ground, but will it be considered as CSR? It's a very technical question, but that given that, Nixon has kind of provided all the response. So this is the other angle, that till now volunteering is not being accepted as CSR by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and this is something which as CII we have been suggesting that, if you put that as part of CSR, if pro bono can be, seen as CSR, then we can see a huge, kind of response from the companies in sending out their employees to work in the rural areas. However, having said that, there are two other key aspects which I would like to share with you. Number one is that amongst the top, the thematic areas where which are receiving CSR funds, rural development is ranked third. So it is receiving quite a bit of CSR funds as per, what the information we have seen in the MCA's reports, the CSR portal, that is what it says. The other aspect is also the local area, the compliance aspect. So the amendment talks, the CSR rules have spoken about, how companies need to focus on local area. Most of the companies, they are not really, operating in the rural areas when it comes to their factories or their plants or their, office premises. So it becomes at times, challenging to respond to what the rule says vis-a-vis what the the real priority area for the country is. So so we are trying to create that balance as CII. We have now set up a rural development committee. We have a aspirational districts committee, where we are trying to advocate that industry needs to focus on at least the aspirational districts.
So,
And we are seeing a good response.
Just as a matter of curiosity, what are ranked as number 1 and number 2 in the CSR expenditures?
So number 1 is education, skilling, livelihood. That is the most preferred sector. And the number 2 is eradicating hunger, health, sanitation, and safe drinking water.
Okay, thank you for that input, because I will be actually personally looking forward to the day when rural development, including this aspect of education or skilling or livelihoods or health, are number 1 rather than number 3. So that is one aspiration or expectation or dream of mine, along with whatever is required in the urban areas. But they should look a little bit beyond. Now, what I would also like to say is the following, that there are a large number of takeaways from the very brilliant and very lucid and interesting, talks by all the speakers. Girish, if you are listening to me, and Yagya and our other great curators, if you can put the takeaways on the chat box as we play the slideshow for the next 15 minutes, so that I do not have to, dwell upon the phenomenal amount of takeaways and outcomes from this very interesting session. I will just mention 1 or 2 that we see that there is greater compliance happening of this 2%, and the government is also becoming like a big threat aspect, not only in terms of FCRA, but also in terms of subsuming the funds which are not utilized for CSR activities, these 2%. And I'm waiting for the day when that really starts happening in a very proactive manner, because then the industry will wake up and shake up and start working more professionally in implementing their CSR funding for the clientele for which it is meant to be. The other aspect which I want to talk about is already, there's been a lot of discussion in this webinar about impact, assessment, monitoring, evaluation. Those are great value areas. I'm very happy that these amendments have taken place, which bring a focus on that. What I'm looking forward to as an individual is the following: more young minds engaged in propelling this entire framework into a vision of the future with more innovations, more apps, more technology, more artificial intelligence, more machine learning, more virtual reality, more augmented reality, more mixed reality. So all sorts of things which are used for, becoming a sort of a enabler, a facilitator, along with women empowerment, so that it becomes easier for the government organizations also, which can use a lot of this through data analytics and other technology, for the NGOs also, for the corporate sector also, and for networking, for partnership between the development accelerators, for collaborations, for finding the right sorts of partners, for finding the right sorts of projects, so that you have portals and technology available at all ends of the spectrum. So that will be what my aspirations will be in the days ahead as we move ahead. And now it's my great privilege. I'm going to conclude here. Yogesh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to hand it back to you because we are already beyond time. But thank you so very much, Yogesh, for being the moderator for this absolutely insightful, useful, outstanding webinar. Thank you to all the speakers, Mr. Nixon Joseph, Rahul, Sarbani, Akshay. Sarbani, I should have named first because we asked you to come in last as a speaker. We are sorry. But your inputs were very, very useful and you represent a very important entity. I thank also the entire team of volunteers and collaborators who have worked so hard to make this event successful. And the key takeaways, besides being put on the chat portal as we go along, hopefully by our team of collaborators, we will also be putting it out in the Wheels Global Foundation website. A link to today's event and the recording for today's event will be on our website also, where there is, very humbly a donate button for these activities as we go ahead. Finally, thanks to all the attendees for attending this webinar. We hope you will also join us for the next webinar on April 23rd. This will be on case studies for smart village development. We already have confirmations from quite a few outstanding speakers again, including Sundar Kamath from Stanford University, which has the Ideal Village program. And we are in discussion with Ministry of Panchayati Raj and Ministry of Rural Development. And we will also be talking about the smart village development, which the Wheels itself is implementing in Aravali in collaboration with NIRDPR and Ministry of Panchayati Raj and the other partners. So please do tune in on April 23rd. More details will be coming your way as we in the days ahead. There is also a very interesting event lined up on April 10th, which is just a few days away, which is a discussion on the COVID book, which was written by me and by Dr. Joseph Chalil, a physician, which is on Amazon bestseller. And this is on April 10th by the Pan IIT Book Club and the Wheels Global Foundation. So we hope you will be able to join in that also and contribute to the discussions on the COVID pandemic and the future of the world. Please watch for our emails and visit our Facebook page for details. Please stay safe, keep well, and enjoy the rest of the weekend. See you all again on April 10th and April 23rd. A very big thank you to all of you. The slide presentation will run again, which ran at the beginning of the program, which gives a description about Wheels activities. Thank you to all those who participated in today, and please spread the word to others who are not able to join today. Thank you. Namaste. Bye-bye. Namaste.
Mr. Nixon.